Good morning. My name is Pablo Pitaluga, and I'm IT-ROI's Vice President of Sales. For today as well, I'm also your webinar coordinator. I want to thank you for taking time to attend our webinar. Hindsight is 2020. It is mission critical to run clarity at peak performance, presented to you by IT-ROI. At this time, all lines are in listening mode only, and this is meant to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, we will have a question and answer session. You will have two options to participate. The first one is you can type a question in the question box in the webinar control panel on your screen. The second choice is to click the raise hand icon on the same webinar control panel. I will then unmute your line and announce your name, and you can proceed to ask your questions. Our presenter, Steve Meller, is Senior Vice President of Service Assurance and an industry veteran. Steve is an information visionary and developed through extensive experience with disparate organizations' financial and human capital management. Steve has had a long pursuit of excellence in IT operations and today manages a team of developers and engineers devoted to our customer success by delivering products and services tailored to meet the most demanding needs. Steve, you may proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Pablo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. As Pablo introduced me, my name is Steve Meller. Today we're going to be talking about service assurance, and in particular, APM, otherwise known as Application Performance Management. One of the things we'll talk about is how does APM work? So at a high level, service assurance is about managing business critical applications performance and availability. So what we're doing is we are assuring our business service works as needed. The service assurance suite includes APM, Application Performance Management, infrastructure management, network performance management, service operations management, and stakeholder reporting, known as Executive Insight. How does APM work? So APM is about application performance. In this slide, we have a view of a typical application with a typical infrastructure. So from left to right, our user is logging into the internet. They're hitting the front of our infrastructure on a enterprise router, going through our firewall, our load balancer, our web servers, an internal core switch, going to our application servers, and from thence to some back-end services, whether they be a database, some sort of middleware, or other services like SAP or PeopleSoft or Oracle E-Business Suite. So just for an example, what we've shown here is a typical transaction might take, and look at that green line at the bottom, below that it says 2.2 S or 2.2 seconds. So I'm just estimating that as the transaction travels, watching the yellow from left all the way up to right, it takes a bunch of time, and then returns to the user in the green on the reverse path. So just kind of swagging in some numbers. But as we all know, bad things can happen. And that 2.2 seconds can become 67 seconds on a particular transaction on a bad day. So when we try to dissect that, what we can see is from the slide, maybe the portion that's spent in the network is still the same, 0.3 seconds. The portion that's spent hitting the firewall is still 0.1 seconds. The portion that's spent on the load balancer is still 0.1. The web server is 0.1. The switch 0.1. But when we hit the application servers, what used to be down in the left 0.2 seconds and up in the right has become 37.7 seconds, shown in red. And when we hit the back end, what used to be down in the lower left, 0.2 seconds, in the upper right has become, in the red, 22.6 seconds. So we see what nominally is going on suddenly has become a problem. And our challenge is, number one, knowing that that's happened at the time it's happened. And number two, discovering the cause. And number three, resolving it, right? So APM gets you all the way up through the resolution of the issue. And that's what we're here to talk about today. APM is key across the life cycle of production monitoring, test discovery, and analysis and resolution of the problem. So let's say that our monitoring team is getting an email from our production server. Those emails are going out periodically. I don't have them suppressed in this drawing, so I show this email. Within the body of the email, I've got a red circled statement that says our Clarity AS server portlet processing average response time in milliseconds is in danger. So, the first level responder gets this email, and he or she has to do something and then call somebody. What do they do, and who do they call? So the first thing they're going to do is call up some sort of information panel like this one. And as you see at the top of this graph, it says Clarity AS server portlet processing, just like in that email, average response time milliseconds in our Clarity production AS domain. Now, Clarity is not a problem application. Clarity is a very nice application that does business critical functions for the enterprise for a lot of people. But what we can see is that on occasion there can be a problem with any application. The most successfully written, the most successfully presented application in the world can have issues. So in this particular panel, our Clarity production server has a fictitious problem. We look at the trace, and in this graph, on the left-hand side, we see, on the y-axis, we see the amount of time it takes for this thing to occur in milliseconds. The axis goes up to 75,300 milliseconds. It's about 75 seconds. The purple trace clearly is exceeding any kind of normal time frame on a regular basis. 70 seconds, 50 seconds, 60 seconds, all over the place. So that purple trace is obviously problematic. But when I look at this more carefully with a trained eye, I can see that the other traces are not problematic. So there's lots of yellow at the bottom and blue and pink, and they're not a problem. So a trained eye would say, oh, well, I can see that there is a problem in my infrastructure, in my application, but it's only with one portlet. All the other portlets are behaving nicely. That tells me that the infrastructure is behaving nicely, and the only thing I need to focus on is this one portlet. So being the good triage engineer that I am, I know to call the application admin. The application admin goes into the discovery phase, and he or she pulls up this view, also out of APM. In this view, we see a timestamp of May 15th, and at the time of 3:55, and the duration is, oh my God, 66,948 milliseconds, or 67 seconds. So the likely question that comes out of everyone's mind is, well, okay, I was looking at that graph that had 67 seconds across it, and I saw in that graph the fictitious red parts of application server. I'm going back to it. And in this graph, we see that, yeah, okay, but we don't have that visibility right now. All we're looking at is 67 seconds. How do we tell that there's 37.7 seconds left taken in the application server and 27 in the database? So the answer is we go into the analysis phase. In the analysis phase, we pull up another panel from APM. In this panel, what we see is from left to right, a view of time, the amount of time it takes for this particular transaction to execute, 67 seconds. From top to bottom is the modular call stack. What module calls what module in this entire transaction? By looking at the width of each of the components, we can tell how much time is consumed in each of those calls. So the URL gets hit at the top. That URL calls to a servlet, the web control servlet in particular. That web control servlet then calls out to the project list, Clarity Page Request Project List. The page calls out to the portlet request Project List ODF. Below that is a bunch of sawtooth-looking things. That's my technical description. Each of these teeth is actually a call to a back-end system, in this case, a database. Well, what we can see from this view is that no one single thing in this entire 67 seconds is predominant. There seems to be a lot of scattered activity. There's sort of equal width for the database calls and the application server spacing. To a trained eye, what this will say to them right away is, well, my database is fine, my application server is fine, but they're just dealing with too much data. So the reality was, in this case, that a particular user created a portlet that brought back too much data. Now, actually, the user doesn't create the portlets, right? The admins do. So our application admin or our developer then has to work with the application admin to ensure that the portlet that they've created doesn't bring back too much data. So when you use APM, you can achieve tremendous improvement in your environment. Results such as reductions in application downtime by as much as 70%. These numbers are not made up. This is the real experience of customers like you. Decreases in mean time to repair by 50% or more. An average ROI of over 300% within 8 months or less. These are real bona fide results. But enough of the slideshow, right? Let's get to the nitty-gritty. You want to see it in action. So let's look at a live view of APM. If I can drag it over here. So here's a console view that somebody might be looking at as it renders. So you can see the same kind of infrastructure from left to right in the chart below. On the left-hand side, we have users. In the middle, it's web servers. The web servers then call out to the application servers, and the application servers then go to a back end, which in this case is labeled SQL Query and SQL Update. But what we see right away is that the application servers are in yellow. What does that mean? So let's come over here to the application servers. We'll drill down into it. When I drill down into the application servers, it takes me to this other page, and I can see activity. The activity here, again, has this one particular URL taking 2.5 seconds. And the number of responses per interval is somewhat meaningful, is 40-ish. So, but everything else seems to be fine. My concurrency is low. There are no errors. There are no stalls. So what I'm going to say is that, again, I'm looking at a particular kind of condition that is specific to a particular part of the application. It is not a global issue. It is just one issue. So let's see how that plays out in real time using this transaction trace panel. I'm going to restart transaction tracing, which is now active, and then I'm going to come over here. And what I've done for this demo is I've created a portlet problem. So in Clarity, an administrator and an application developer can do some really useful things with portlets that are well designed. But a developer and an application administrator can get together and build portlets that are not well designed. And for the purpose of this demonstration, I have done something that nobody would really deploy in production, assuming they wanted to keep their jobs. So, I have this this demonstration of this portlet behavior. You can see in this view that this particular project list, again, took quite some time to complete. I think this was, 15 seconds. 15 seconds is pretty nasty. But I can look at these database calls individually, see the query that's being executed on the back end, and how much time it's being taken. So what I can do from this information is then I can then ask the developer or the application administrator, look, I'm looking at this query. It's taken look down at the bottom, the timestamp, duration is 2,000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. If that's slow, I can say, hey, somebody take a look at that. Here's the query. We're looking right at it. In particular, in my environment, I don't even have a monitor on my database other than to make sure that the server is up. What I use APM entirely to monitor the database performance because, in fact, all I really care about is what my user experience is. I don't care if the database thinks it's fine or not, because the real question is, what are my users experiencing? How are they getting by? So in this view, I can see things happening in real time. So here's an event that's occurring right now, May 23rd at 11:16 a.m. What I can do with this is I can drill down into the call stack in real time, and I can select this view all called methods. What view all called methods does is it drills down into each component of the call and tells me what each one is doing. So get action alias, get default skin, get instance, blah, 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 blah. Now in Clarity, right, I'm not the developer of Clarity. I can't tell you what each of these things do. If I had my own application, my own business critical application, then I would call my developer in and I would say, hey, developer, what does send redirect do? That thing is showing that it's taken up a bunch of time. If the developer says, gee, I don't know, or yeah, I know that it's my code, but I don't know exactly what it's doing that's causing a lot of time, then what we can do is we can click on this Add Instrumentation button in real time so that the APM tool would then subsequently bring back data about that particular method to the display. That would give real feedback to the developer to say, well, if send redirect was the problem, then let's add the instrumentation to that particular component, to that particular method, class, package, what have you. Bring back that information so that when we analyze it, we can see real results, get real feedback right away. So when we look at something at a display like this, we can pick apart levels that we can see, and we can pick apart the things that that require us to add instrumentation to see. So for example, this controller piece, it doesn't have any other calls that we can see to a back-end device. So the add instrumentation feature of this would be significant, because then that big, what is it, duration, 44,430 milliseconds, we can take that apart into its component, into each method that's being called within it, and see which method it is, and see what the problem is, and analyze it. So in this case, again, I think I can certainly share with you that if this is taking too long, it is very likely, since this is all very evenly spaced, this particular backend query is taking 1.5 seconds, which is not a particularly long time, that again, the problem here is too much data. And I can vouch for that because I deliberately fudged this particular portlet so that it would indeed bring back too much data. What we can do is, of course, we can always see an example of something that doesn't take too long. For example, let's pick this guy, 950 milliseconds. It's a nice little query to a back-end device. So you see here at the top, backends, backends, backends. The total length of time from 0 on the left all the way over to just about shy of 1 second on the right. So this particular thing doesn't take a long time. Nothing to worry about, easy to see. APM exposes this whole behavior for you so that you don't have to do anything. Furthermore, when I'm building these dashboards, I can customize my dashboards to represent the kind of behavior we're looking at. So I can start with the overview, as we were showing earlier, with my green, yellow, and sometimes red alerts. Those give us the highest level of information. And then I can drill down to the offending participants. If I don't believe what I'm looking at, so I drill down in an application server, it shows me this stuff. I'm like, well, what I'd really like to do is take a look at hardware as well. So I can look at this hardware view, and I can see, okay, well, all these flat lines, everything looks like it's behaving nicely, flat line, flat line, flat line. No, I'm not really worried about memory. Here's the red button for memory. I can look at my CPU. Some spikes, but let's look at the scale. The scale only goes 0 to 10%. So these little spikes are less than 10% of CPU utilization, so that's kind of low. The entire server, the total utilization never exceeds 36%. So, it's humming along pretty nicely. So you can look through the different components that make up the environment. Select components that are of interest, or components that have been alerted by the transaction trace, by the alerts that we've built, or by the messages we've received. I can look at the individual portlets. So in this case, we're back to looking at that purple portlet. The purple portlet is again this fudged project list thing. But I can again see that all these other portlets are behaving within the 5-second paradigm. And in my environment, what I do is I've set, somewhat arbitrarily, 5 seconds as being the tolerable maximum for a web page rebuild. Now, obviously, in your infrastructure, you may choose something else. You may have designed your infrastructure so that all of your web pages respond in more like 2 seconds. That, for your customers, that may be the limit to an acceptable performance. So once you've defined what the limits are for your acceptable performance, you build that into your APM device, and off you go to town, pull things up, have a look at them. So I can look at the different web services calls, the different database calls, my front-end information. Each of these dashboards is a representation that I've built in order to properly display the right information, so that at the end of the day, when I'm looking for this kind of event, that I can pick out that no, it's not in the infrastructure, it's not the CPU, it's not in the network, but where it is in the application server and the database. It's equally spaced, so that's telling me that, okay, it's equally spaced, so it's something that's inherent to the application, by then subsequently looking at the other transactions and seeing that, oh, they don't have a problem. It's only this one transaction that has a problem. I can tell you right off the bat, oh, well, that's because that one portlet is just bringing back too much data, and I need to call my application admin and my developer and say to them, okay, you guys, this thing has just taken way too long. We have to redesign it. We have to do something about it. So that concludes the presentation that I've intended to make. If anybody has any questions, I will entertain them at this time.
At this time, if you have any questions, I would suggest that you participate one of two ways, that you either type in your questions in the question box in the webinar control panel, or if you raise your hand, I will unmute your line and ask you to ask your questions. So, Steve, in the meantime, we have a question that I'll read. It says, basically, is this a front end to Intrascope Willy?
So the APM solution that I was showing today is the CA Intrascope APM solution. So CA, as we saw in the live demo presentation, I think I even had the icon shown. Yeah. So what I was showing was the Wiley product. Obviously CA bought Wiley at some time ago, and now this product is fully the CA application performance management solution.
Okay. Steve, another question. As far as Clarity goes, what does this do to the performance tracking in and out of the box Clarity doesn't do?
What Clarity has is this very, very elegant feature called SQL Trace. The SQL Trace performance analysis brings back a wealth of information about the methods that are called, the time spent in the database, the rows returned, the data that's returned. What APM does is it takes that and puts it into a single box that anybody can look at without a specialized skill set that is Clarity specific. So what you can do is you can take a look at this, at these graphs, and look for the spikes and see the monitoring and look for the analysis and drill down and just compare a flat line with a spike. So what this does is it enables the organization to monitor, triage, and resolve problems without having one of those phone calls where everybody gets on the call. There's a DBA on the call, there's an app admin on the call, there's a web server admin, a network admin, everybody's on the call, and everybody's saying, no, the problem's not mine. The database is working fine. Look, all my queries are returning fine. The web servers are working fine. Everything's reporting fine. The application servers are doing fine. The CPU utilization is 35%. Everything seems to be fine, but at the end of the day, the customer still has an issue. With Clarity's built-in tools, what you can do is you can turn on tracing, which introduces some overhead and then generates a lot of log file data. And what our application admin then does is they wade through the log file data to pull out the answer to the question. What APM does is it makes it graphical. It makes it visible for everyone in the organization. So anybody can look at this and in no time flat figure out what the problem is. That's the real value add, is that it shortens that triage time and it takes out all the finger pointing. Does that answer the question?
Steve, another question that has come in, and I'd like to again remind the audience that if you'd like to ask the question, to just please raise your hand and I will unmute your line. But several questions have come in that have been they'd like to read to you. One is, does CA or IT-ROI sell the Clarity Agent PDB for Willie?
Actually, if an organization already owns APM, which it sounds like you do, since you know what a PBD is, the answer is that the PBD is public domain. You already own Wiley, so the PBD, you can get it just for asking. So yes, there is a PBD for Wiley, for Clarity, I'm sorry, and like many PBDs, there's a whole library, there's a whole universe out there. Just ask for it in the CA APM community in the CA support website, and somebody will post it up there.
Steve, another question. Can historical logs be applied to APM for analysis?
Yes. In fact, many of the events that we were looking at occurred some time ago. In fact, this display that I have up shows that I captured all this data prior to 10 a.m. this morning. And in particular, we can go back in time. In fact, what we can do is we can have a offline APM system copy the database from our production APM system to the offline system and load all the traces and historical data, baseline data into our offline system for more extensive analysis. So absolutely can do that.
Okay, Steve, another question, please. Can you talk about buying Wiley software versus engaging service engagement to find bottlenecks?
Well, so the challenge that we all face is if we have a particular business critical application and there's something going on with it that is causing us consternation, how do we deal with that in a cost-effective manner? So as a software vendor, the right answer would be, buy my software. As a customer, you might say, well, gee, it seems like a heavy expenditure just for this one-off event that I'm looking at. But what I was trying to get to, and maybe didn't do such a great job, is that APM is a life cycle product. It isn't just for a critical situation, a one-off. What it is it's a cultural improvement. It helps you get to that level where I get alerted for any problem, I can triage any problem, and I can resolve any problem. So that's a thought paradigm that's better than, well, gee, I keep this hardened staff that's available 24/7, and they keep their eyes glued to a screen, and whenever they see something, they react to it. Well, that's a nice reactive model. A proactive model might be to engage APM in development, take it through the test cycle before you roll something into production, and what you end up with in production with will be something that hums along nicely, has occasional need for monitoring when bad things happen, but you already have the skill set, because the same skill set can be used globally across your business critical applications up to a certain point, right? So I barely spoke about Clarity other than to say, well, gee, I used Clarity as a platform for this demo, right? So the purple trace that we all saw, going back in time, this purple trace, right? So you didn't need to know that purple trace was a project list or a something or whatever, and you didn't need to know what all those blues and yellows and pinks were, right? You just saw this and you go, okay, well, because I understand what I'm looking at globally, I don't need to know that that purple trace is a project list. All I need to know is, well, my infrastructure must be doing well because globally everything seems to be performing nicely. It's just that one portlet, so I'm just going to go call the application admin and tell them, deal with it. And so to answer your question, if you do have a one-off situation, obviously I'm sure either CA or IT-ROI will be happy to engage with you and help you with your issues. But the purpose of this webinar was to show that APM has value across the entire life cycle.
Steve, I just wanted to remind the audience that we will be posting a link to this video on our website, and I'll be sending out an email in a couple of days. There's a few more questions, and then I'll go ahead and open the lines. I saw in the presentation that there was user information. Can we create reports by user?
Yes, absolutely. So it turns out that while APM uses, for the most part, a proprietary database, because it does actually have a database that can be queried, we can build a reporting model against the data that's captured by APM so that we're not constrained to the dashboards or the reports that are canned. We can take that data and export it into whatever kind of reporting environment that you choose, and then build whatever kind of visuals out of that you'd like. Now, of course, doing that in real time is a bit of a challenge because, of course, there's a lot of data here. But as a matter of doing problem solving, so some user for the last 6 weeks has been complaining over much and no other user is complaining, so what's up with that? So APM will support those kinds of queries and those kinds of reports in an offline capability by exporting the data to another system. And of course, as those of you who are familiar with IT-ROI, we are the integration bridge specialists, so we can help you with designing and implementing that integration.
A handful of other questions have come in, Steve. What kind of overhead does having this monitoring create to application performance in your experience?
We can actually, oops, I am now unmuted. Thank you.
Sorry.
So, sorry about that. So I can speak to that, and I can also show the answer to that. So, and I'm sorry about the ums. It's a bad habit. We were looking at this panel before. This shows the amount of overhead that the JVM that contains the Wiley agent imposes on the system. So here we're seeing that the amount of overhead imposed by the amount of CPU utilization of this particular JVM is hovering under 10%. The typical numbers for a production deployment may be significantly less, 2% or less. In this case, I have instrumented this particular agent in it, as you might imagine, with some rather heavy impact because I wanted to show lots of good stuff in a demo. In a production environment, what you'll do is you'll pick out the 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 metrics that are of interest to you and instrument just those. And the 12 or 15,000 that I'm showing here would be significantly reduced and the overhead would be much lower. So the answer to your question is, generally speaking, 2% of CPU and much less than 100 meg of heap.
Steve, another question that has come in. I use SAP hosted by IBM. What are the challenges of instrumenting other companies' applications like that?
Well, that's a great question. So, we showed a demo of Clarity, and one of the questions that was asked early on is there a custom adapter for Clarity? And the answer, of course, was yes. There's not a custom adapter, but a set of instrumentation instructions that are Clarity specific, so we can drill down into portlets, pages, and the like. So that exists for many applications in our industry, many vendor-based applications. But one of the key questions is, can I actually instrument my application with Wiley? Does the vendor abrogate support when this occurs? And the answer is no. Well, the answer is it's fine. The API, the application programming interface, the thing that the Wiley agent uses to diagnose problems in the application is a fundamental part of the Java spec, or equivalently of the .NET spec. So in the Java environment, the Wiley agent is calling to Java, and it's saying, send me this data that you've already published because it's in the spec for Java. So we're just asking for stuff that's already there. Similarly, in the .NET environment, that's also a part of the .NET framework since 1.1, I believe. So all that the Wiley agent is doing is asking for data that is already published and then extracting it and sending it back. Hope that answers the question.
And another question, Steve, is my application's in the cloud on several hundreds of application servers. How do you handle that?
Another great question. So the agent sends data back to a central database. So if you have hundreds of application servers in the cloud, that's a lot of traffic over the network sending application data back to your application database for the monitor. So for that particular paradigm, CA has another solution that is similar to Wiley but different, and that's the NIMsoft product. So what we can do is we can take that to our next webinar and show how does cloud-based application performance monitoring work. In this particular case, if you have that paradigm and you have the Wiley APM or Intrascope and you want to deploy that, then what you might do is you might deploy it on 1 or 2 or 10 servers and feed that data back so that you get kind of a representative sample. So no, you're not instrumenting everything. You still run the risk of having a particular server exposed. But in general, you're able to at least retrieve data that's of value to you so that you can get a pretty good feel for what's going on in your environment. Hope that answers the question.
Well, Steve, those are all the questions that I have come in. If you'd like to ask another question, again, you can raise your hand and I will unmute your line, or you can type your questions in the question box in your webinar control panel. As a reminder, we'll be posting a link to this video and sending an email to all the participants of our webinar. We appreciate your participation. Steve, that's all the questions that we have then.
Well, everyone, thanks very much for attending the presentation. I really appreciate it. And let us know if there's anything that we can do to help you with your business critical applications.
And a final reminder from my part, all of our contact information is in the invitations that you received. My contact information is the invitation you received. So if we can be of service, please give us a call. That concludes our presentation then. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, the audience.